So I think we're ready to go. I'm going to go through the slides, and then I have a booklet to share with you, and then we'll turn off the recording and we'll do the Q&A after that. So can you see the slides there? Right, and it's jumped ahead to the overview. And this is what we're going to try to cover for everybody today. We're going to define ambiguous loss. We're going to look at paradoxical thinking. We're going to consider your community of support. And then we're going to look at Pauline Boss's 7 guidelines for the dementia journey. And Pauline Boss is the lady who wrote the book Ambiguous Loss and is associated with that. And so this is sort of a mini version of what she has brought forward for us to consider. And it's just a brief overview. If you want more, you can always get Pauline Boss's book. There's also a wonderful course on ambiguous loss that we teach as a support group course, multiple week course. So you can look into that at the Society as well if you're interested after today. So just want to talk a little bit about the fact that sometimes loss and grief are associated with death. And we don't always think of them immediately in other contexts, but they certainly are associated with other situations. And so ambiguous loss is definitely associated with dementia. And look at these pictures. Aren't these sweet pictures? Aren't they lovely? Don't they show happy, happy times? And the thing is, these pictures here, they illustrate that ambiguous loss can be associated with dementia because what you see in these shots are examples of hopes and dreams that you may have had, perhaps for retirement years or your parents' relationship with the children, their grandchildren. And these things aren't necessarily going to play out like these pictures when dementia is involved. So when we're defining ambiguous loss, we're really looking at a loss that is unclear. It has no resolution and no closure. This unique and devastating kind of loss, it can be physical or it can be psychological, but in either case, a family member status as absent or present remains hazy. So that is the formal definition of ambiguous loss. When we're looking at ambiguous loss in dementia, we're looking at a term that was coined by Pauline Boss, the author. And it's where absence and presence coexist. And that's what happens when a family member has dementia. A closure isn't possible, and it's a roller coaster of finding and losing folks again. It's a very unclear loss. It's because dementia is incurable that it creates a deep and long-lasting ambiguity. And when somebody has dementia, their absence and their presence, they coexist. They're there physically, but they might not be there cognitively or emotionally for you. And it challenges, as care partners, it challenges our ability to cope, and it can complicate our grieving process. And that roller coaster of losing and finding and losing and finding, that can come within a day, within days, within weeks, because people will have moments of clarity. And the person living with dementia suddenly seems like their old selves for a tiny bit. And then it changes again. And that can really challenge your stability and your strength. It may cause you to feel helpless, these brief rays of sunshine, and then they disappear behind the clouds again. And it's really impossible to just get over it because the losses continue to happen for a prolonged period of time. The ambiguous loss that comes with dementia is that the relationship as it once was changed. The loss of your loved one as they used to be the loss of shared dreams and goals, like those pictures, the loss of leisure time that care partners experience, and loss of control and independence. Those pieces all come with it, part and parcel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a film. Now it's 8 minutes long, 8 minutes, but why we chose this film and why we've inserted it is that it really shows the here and not here in a very visual way. And so I have given you the link to it. It's live in the slides that I sent you. And if you're ever interested in revisiting it, you can just click on that blue link. I'm going to show it to you now.
This is Mom's video diary.
Wait a minute. It's too dirty.
Say Tuesday, June 22nd, 2010.
Hi. This is... Do I say this is who?
You can do whatever you want.
This is Pam White. Should I start?
Yeah, whenever you want.
Okay. Hello, I am Pam White. I am the mother of 3 children. I will tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in a hotel. My father owned the hotel, and it was an unusual way to grow up, but it was a lovely way to grow up. I was an actress. I did modeling. I live for my family and my children. And one little glitch is that I have developed Alzheimer's. And initially I was quite distressed and upset about it. But it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really change anything. So I don't feel sad and I don't feel regret. I feel blessed that I have this wonderful family and a husband who is extraordinarily wonderful.
Good morning. Hi. I'm getting you up.
Why?
Because I'm sure you'd like to have breakfast. I'll be right there.
Can you tell me the story of when you proposed to Mom?
My senior year in college, the Vietnam War was raging. A lottery was done and draft numbers were drawn. My number was 16, which meant it was 100% sure that I would have been drafted. My great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father were all in the United States Navy. So I applied to Naval Officer School. All the while I had been planning on asking your mom to marry me. She is capable of doing less and less around the house. I probably talked to a woman from the Alzheimer's Society 2, maybe 3 times. They think it's important I should somehow remain more of a husband by having a caregiver get her up in the morning, get her dressed, bathe her, give her medicine, make her meals. Maybe. So far, so good. I don't mind doing it. I like being with her.
or confused has been hard for Dad?
I don't think he thinks I'm confused. In that way. I said I don't think he feels that he is, or that feels that I am confused. I'm not confused. Do you think I'm confused?
No, maybe that's a bad word. But you need help with things that you didn't used to need help with.
Right, yeah.
Do you think that's hard for him? Did you notice a change with Mom from the last trip?
No, the change in the year has been profound. Watching the person that you love so much, who has been, so much a part of your life. It's nice she smiles when she sees me. Thank God for her smile. That's huge. But there's a lot more that, I used to get from her that she would do for me that's gone. My nickname is Fast Eddie, and it's because I tend to just get things done in a hurry. And Bam's favorite question is, "Where's Ed?" And I can answer it 100 times a day. Just getting her out of the house and into the car to go shopping it's a big deal. And her walk is now a shuffle, not a walk, so it's just slow, slow, slow. And don't ever let her know that you're impatient, which I'm sure there's several times a week when she knows that I'm impatient with her. And she knows it. You know she knows it. And of course I feel terrible when that happens.
Yeah, sometimes if I'm the first thing she sees in the morning, I don't actually think she recognizes me.
That's beginning. What must it be like? How much does Pam know about what's happened, what's happening, and what will happen to her? Every time I see her, I hope I hug her. Every time I see her, I tell her I love her. I tell her how magnificent her smile is. I tell her what a great life we've had together, and I thank her for what she's done for me. And she was an incredibly attentive, loving mother. I know she'd love to be that person. No, I know that. I have made a commitment to this beautiful woman that I will live with her forever. So whatever happens, we're definitely doing it together.
So that might have been a pretty tough film to watch, but that film actually addresses some really important points. And, the gentleman in the film declined to have additional supports come in and help with the caregiving. And that really, really varies from situation to situation. Everybody's journey is unique and individual. So don't take that as gospel as the way it should be. I think that as time marches on, we all have to change and adapt to the current situation. he said, you know, he was doing all right at the time, and the times they change. So you may need more assistance depending on your circumstances, depending on whether you are younger or older, have your own health issues. She was a young onset case, so both of them were fairly still young and strong physically when the journey started. So I just wanted to remind you that everybody has their own journey, and you go with what's right for you and your circumstances. But I really think it spoke to the change in relationship. He talked about things that couldn't be done anymore, roles that couldn't be fulfilled anymore, things that he wasn't receiving in the relationship anymore. So it gave a good example of that. And at the end, you know, he was asking questions. And unfortunately, this ambiguous loss is sometimes made up of questions that will never have an answer. We don't know. We don't know how. We don't know why. We don't know what people are thinking. And it all adds up to this situation that we find ourselves in. So I want to talk a little bit about the effects of the ambiguity. Certainly it impacts relationships. Conflicts could arise. Families may cease rituals and traditions that were important to them. Obviously, it can affect the care partner's well-being. It will impinge on their own emotional health, the care partner's self-care, particularly if they don't have any assistance along the journey. Care partners can actually develop illnesses themselves related to the stress of caregiving. And sometimes substance abuse can look like a solution if care partners are stressed and struggling, or even get stressed to the point that there may be some anger demonstrated towards the person living with dementia. And again, that was alluded to in the film. It confuses the decision-making process. You wonder, hey, wait, they seem to be doing so well. Should I apply for long-term care or not? Just as an example, it kind of freezes your ability to grieve. And it certainly blocks coping, that ambiguity piece. So there are different types of ambiguous loss. And there's the first type, which is leaving without a goodbye. That's maybe when the person goes missing. Now that doesn't have to be a dementia situation. That can be any number. I think often of hikers that get off a trail and don't get found again, or accidents on the water. But it can even happen with dementia if somebody wanders off and can't be found. Or this is the more common dementia situation, is a goodbye without any leaving. The dementia diagnosis comes, the person is there with you physically, but only physically as time goes on. So let's have a look at paradoxical thinking. This can be a little bit tricky to wrap your head around. So it's called both and thinking. It's knowing that there's truth in two contradictory ideas. So it's being able to see that your family member is both here and gone at the same time. Balancing two different ideas at once is actually less stressful than constantly looking for an absolute. So you want to try to avoid absolute thinking. So it helps to have a name for the losses and the grief that you're experiencing, and it helps you understand and cope more effectively. So I'm going to give you some examples of both and, this paradoxical thinking. So now you have a name for it, paradoxical thinking. I take care of both them and myself. That's both and thinking. I am both a care partner and a person with needs. And you can see how, contradictory ideas sometimes, but both true at the same time. I both wish it was over and wish that my family member goes on living. So these paradoxical ideas existing at the same time. And so finding a way to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense, it helps you find the middle ground. And that's really important. We want to try to avoid absolute thinking, acting like the person is completely gone or being in denial that any changes have occurred at all. We want to learn to hold two opposing ideas in our minds at one time instead of focusing on one extreme. So we have to see the person both as here and gone sometimes. So you don't have to answer this. I just want you to think about it for a minute. This is a little reflection, and this is an exercise in paradoxical thinking. What have you lost and what do you still have at the same time? And you don't have to do it right now. You might choose to do it later on, but try this exercise. What have you lost? What do you still have? That's a reflection for you to think about. So we're going to talk about different types of family, and we're going to talk about psychological family. And according to Pauline Boss, the psychological family are the people you want to spend the holidays with, or you want to hang out with, or you want to talk to when you're upset, you want to share your sadness with. It's not always your biological family. It can be, but not necessarily so. And the psychological family, those are the folks that provide valuable human connection and social support. It's the people that you choose to talk to in both good and bad times. And it's particularly helpful to have a psychological family if you feel very isolated as a caregiver. So let's visit changing family roles and rituals for a moment now. Consider how you can adapt or create new rituals to fit your current situation. Because I've always said that dementia is a disease of adaptation. We don't suddenly cut everything off, but we often have to tweak as we go along, and those tweaks are usually pretty continual. So communicate to family what helps and what changes are needed to better support the person. How can they help? What might they give up doing or start doing, whatever those changes are? And we need to give ourselves permission to be flexible with long-standing family rituals and traditions. And so that's something that, again, is very individual to the person, the family, and the time that you find yourself in. My family has certainly changed how we get together. For example, Mother's Day, we would have brought all the family together, but now that's a bit much. And so we choose to just bring the offspring and none of the spouses. So sometimes adaptations have to occur as time marches on. So these are Pauline Boss's 7 guidelines for the caregiving journey that I'm going to run through with you now. And then I've got a little film by Pauline Boss for you to watch. So first suggestion she has is find meaning. How do you make sense of this? Wow. How do we make sense? Naming it helps. And you can call it ambiguous loss. You can think about paradoxical, that's the both and thinking. So naming it really helps. Finding whatever is spiritual for you, forgiveness, and continue to adapt those rituals. These are things that will help you. When we, it helps us in life when we forgive people. It helps us in the dementia journey when we adapt as required as time goes on. So these are helpful things on the slide. I'm going to mention a few things that might hinder you more than help you. Being angry, desiring revenge, holding secrets, feeling martyred. That really will hinder you. If you can get in touch with spirituality, whatever that might mean for you, it tends to actually increase our tolerance for ambiguity. And dementia is a pretty ambiguous situation. Number 2, balancing control with acceptance. So the main cause of distress is not being able to resolve the problem. It's not the burden of caregiving necessarily or the severity of the disease, but we want to help, we want to fix, we want to do, and there isn't the solution. So what might help? Well, recognizing that we can't control everything. And that too can be a bitter pill to swallow. It can be tough. But once we recognize that we can't control everything, that can help us decrease self-blame and externalize it to the ambiguity. And then mastering one's internal self through meditation, prayer, whatever you use for stress relief. You need to decrease the stress. Those are things that will help. What might hinder you is believing that bad things only happen to bad people. You're not bad people. I'm not bad people. We are not bad people, and bad things still happen. And believing that the harder you work, the more you can fix it, that will hinder you. And the more you avoid the situation, that will hinder as well. So we don't want to get into those types of thinking if we can avoid it. So her third suggestion is to broaden your identity. And that involves, again, some thinking and some examination. Now, I did send you this slide set, so I hope that if you choose to, you will go back and you will look at some of these questions that we've put out for you to think upon. So, because everybody's situation is unique and individual, think about, for you and you only, the roles in your life. Who is in what role now? Who's not in what role now? And who plays what role? And that might only be between yourself and the person with the diagnosis, or you may think in a broader sense about all the people that are involved in the caregiving circle. So examine the roles in your life. And you might want to focus, think about restructuring the roles that you play. You can't control anybody else, but we can control ourselves to some degree. So let's restructure the roles that we play. Where are you now in the journey? And what you want to do is you want to revise your identity to fit the ambiguity. So that's where you go back to the paradoxical thinking. I am somebody who gives care, and I am somebody who needs to care for myself. That's just an example for you. What would hinder you in broadening your identity? Isolation, being the sole and only, one and only, and not increasing the circle of support and care, and being disconnected from other people. Well, heaven forbid, but COVID has really made that challenging for us. And hopefully as we come out of COVID, we won't be as disconnected from other people as we might have felt. Number 4 has to do with managing mixed emotions, learning to live with ambivalence. You can benefit from having small rituals along the way to mark each new loss as it occurs. You want to find rituals that mark the loss, but honor your loved one. That helps make the loss real, and it gives others the opportunity to acknowledge it. Really to acknowledge the mixed emotions associated with supporting the person with dementia. Think back to the film for just a moment, and there he was talking about how he wanted to be there. He wanted to be the one. He had made a vow and a commitment. He was going to be the caregiver. And yet he was talking about how he got frustrated and impatient. And so mixed emotions. I want to be the caregiver, but it's stressful for me. Normalizing anger and guilt. We all feel anger. We all feel guilt. We all feel impatience. That's part of being human. Accept that conflicting feelings are normal. So it's a challenge because this is both and. We have conflicting feelings at the same time. We can experience joy and love at the same time as we're experiencing fear and turmoil, right? And talk about your feelings with somebody. That is super important. And I want to put a plug in here for our support groups, because you can not only talk with certainly a qualified facilitator, but you talk with other people who are journeying at the same time. So what hinders you from managing mixed emotions? Denying that you have emotions or that there are mixes of emotions, and not talking about the thoughts you're having, maybe wishing the person would pass on, but never articulating that, never talking about it. So we do want to talk about our feelings. That's actually really important. Number 5, hold on and let go. Aren't we back to paradoxical in a way? So recognizing that your loved one is both here and gone, grieving what is lost, celebrating what remains. So creating new memories if you can, oral histories, scrapbooks, finding new connections. You want to celebrate they often refer to it as finding moments of joy. Celebrate in the moment, because people living with dementia do tend to live in the moment. And maybe they won't remember, but you will. You will remember that moment of joy. Our friend on the film, our gentleman on the film, you know, he celebrated every time he got a smile. That gave him a moment of joy. Number 6, as we go down the list, is rediscovering hope. So here's another one of those questions that I'm going to invite you to reflect on. What gives you hope? Think about that when you get a chance later on. What gives you hope? You don't want to let your former hopes and dreams give way to the discovery of new ones. You don't want to be stuck in a place. It's important that while you give care, you also picture in your mind what your future might be like, with new connections, new hobbies, new travel plans. What will help, again, bring you back to whatever spirituality means for you, but finding something spiritual, becoming more comfortable with ambiguity, laughing, having a joke, imagining new options, feeling good about yourself, even if things don't go your way. It's really important that you do look to the future, because you won't be a care partner forever. Now, what might hinder you would be insisting on an end to suffering and seeking closure now on the journey, or if your new hopes are really unrealistic. Don't come up with a new hope that they're going to have a cure in 6 months. That wouldn't be a very realistic new hope. And number 7, take the time to mind yourself. So seek professional support if you feel hopeless and depressed. Find a regular support or social group to be involved with. You can do that through the Alzheimer's Society, through your, if you have a faith community, maybe it's your book club, who knows, but being part of a group and feeling support for yourself, super, super important. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, this is a very updated video clip. I was only able to find this yesterday. And this is Pauline Boss, the woman who wrote the book and really not only coined the term ambiguous loss, but brought it into the public consciousness. And it's again, an 8-minute clip, and it's called Ambiguous Loss in a Time of Pandemic. And here we are, hopefully coming out of the pandemic. Again, I've given you the link, and we'll just watch this 8-minute film, and then we'll move on again. So this is Pauline Boss.
Hi, my name is Pauline Boss. I'm Professor Emeritus in the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. I've worked in the area of ambiguous loss for 40 years, and most recently wrote a book about the myth of closure. How are the two ideas connected, ambiguous loss and myth of closure? First, let me define them. Ambiguous loss is a loss that has a no resolution. It's simply put, a loss that remains unclear. There are two kinds of ambiguous losses. First is the physical ambiguous loss, where the body is missing. Person is kidnapped or lost at sea. During the pandemic, it might have been a person in a hospital whom you could not visit and may have died alone without your being at their bedside. Aside from physical ambiguous losses, there are also psychological ambiguous losses where the mind is missing, but the body is there. The person may be in front of you, but they may have dementia. They've lost their memory or their cognitive abilities. Or they may have a serious mental illness, or they may be addicted. During the pandemic, there were also psychological ambiguous losses, such as loss in something abstract, like loss of trust in the world as a fair and safe place. Of course, there were physical ambiguous losses during the pandemic when you couldn't visit the people you loved, physically parted, as we were sequestering for over a year, really. So then what is closure and how does it link to ambiguous loss? Well, early on, even I said that ambiguous loss, because it is unclear, has no closure. But that was actually an error, because that implies that we want closure. Closure is not desired by people who lose loved ones. What they want is certainty. They want to know where the body is. They want to know what happened and why it happened. And that's different than closure. Closure is a perfectly good idea in business for business contracts. During the pandemic, we saw stores that closed. That's closure. But it's a bad word to use with human relationships. And people who have lost someone actually feel hurt by people who use that word with them, thinking, are you over it yet? Have you found closure? That is an unkind thing to say. Instead, what we should do is think in paradox. and think both and. By that I mean, for example, the more you seek closure after a loss, the more likely you will have complicated grief, the harder it will be to move forward with life. So it's just the opposite of what we have been thinking, at least in this country. I'm not sure that the entire world would agree that closure is an ideal thing to have after loss. I think it may be uniquely American. And I'll say more about that in a minute. There are 6 guidelines that I've tested in the field with disasters and with therapy in the clinic and in research that help people live with loss rather than seeking closure. The first is finding meaning. You have to make sense out of the loss, and many losses are meaningless. That is, they don't make sense. That too is a meaning. Mastery is the second one, and here is where Western cultures, and especially the United States, are especially high on wanting mastery over unanswered questions. And when you have loss, like from a pandemic with a virus we couldn't figure out, or even from an ordinary death, you still may have unanswered questions. And the more mastery-oriented a society is, the harder they will have to live with unanswered questions. We can borrow some ideas from more Eastern cultures to ease our stress about that. Then there's identity. We need to change our identity after we've lost someone. We need to normalize our ambivalence after we've lost someone. It's not always our fault. The deaths during the pandemic, many other deaths that come along from disease, accidents, old age, are not our fault. And yet there's a tendency for human beings to blame themselves. And then there's attachment, and we need to shift our attachment after someone we love is gone. And with ambiguous loss, it's particularly difficult to shift that attachment. It's also difficult after a death, but at least you have clarity that you need to move forward in a new way. The same is true with ambiguous loss, but here again, we use both and thinking. I can move ahead with my life in a new way, and I can remember the person who is missing. Or as many people say, he's gone, but not for sure. And those kinds of paradoxical statements help lower the stress of people who suffer from ambiguous loss. It requires change to live with this kind of ambiguity. And therefore, the tolerance for ambiguity is what we're trying to increase. Resilience is the tolerance for ambiguity when you have these kinds of losses. And during the pandemic, of course, we had so much uncertainty, so much death, so much in unanswered questions that we are now weary from the ambiguous losses that have happened during this time. There were clear losses, such as loss of income, which can be quantified, how many deaths we had, and so on. But there were many, many unclear, ambiguous losses, such as I said, the loss of trust in the world as a safe place, the loss of trust in our leaders, perhaps, the loss of freedom to move about as we had the loss of routine, and so on. So change is imperative for us to move forward after these kinds of losses. And change itself is stressful, but paradoxically, if you don't shift gears, if you don't change, the stress will be more difficult and immobilize you longer. I want to end with something that I wrote in a long time ago in the first book on ambiguous loss. And know that however you have suffered during this particular time in our history, pandemic and then racism, which was uncovered as something we needed to attend to more than we have in the past. And other kinds of societal problems came up as well, that we now are dealing with a lot of stress, not just the virus still, but with the change that is coming after it. The dilemma for all of us is to bring clarity to an ambiguous situation now. Failing that, and we will in most cases, the critical question is how to live with ambiguous losses. For each of us, the answer will be different. It will depend on culture and our belief systems, but the answers are less critical than the questions. I hope you are as curious as I have been about those questions. Thank you.
So that was Pauline Boss, and that was very recent, as I said, just found it yesterday. I will, when I send the evaluation out, I'll send the link to that in case you're interested. There were more references at the end of that clip that you might want to check out. So back to giving you something to think on, because she had a lot of important things to say in there. You know, how do we learn to live with ambiguity? I also really liked how she sort of teased apart the difference between clarity and closure. And she really addressed the fact that it requires change of us, this ambiguous loss that we're living through. And change is hard for folks, for sure. So when you're doing your reflecting after this, there's two questions that I'd like you to think on. What is one thing, you just have to think of one thing that you've been doing to take care of yourself? And what is one thing that brings you energy or joy? And I hope that you'll be able to come up with an answer for each of those questions. If you can't, please reach out to our social work team or to somebody else. But I hope that you will think of one thing you've been doing to care for yourself and one thing that brings you joy or energy. So these are just some of the resources, just some details. I want to talk a bit about our programming. And look at this. The first square says supportive counseling. I've mentioned it a couple of times today. I really want to reinforce the idea that it is available. It is available at no charge. And then the bottom square says group sessions. And again, this will be very, very helpful for many folks traveling the dementia journey, because you have other people traveling the same journey that you can interact with. And it helps to normalize your experience, and we can support each other and share ideas. We also have a wide variety of, as you know, education sessions, social recreational programming. We've got horticulture starting up, an array of new events that are playing out over the summer months. So take a look at our new program guide that's just been printed and just being sent out via email. So consider all of the different opportunities that are there to help bring some vitality, moments of joy, some self-care to you, and some activity for the person that you care for. I do want to mention Finding Your Way. Several times in today's talk, it was alluded to that somebody might go missing and not be found. And that was the first kind of ambiguous loss. And heaven forbid that that should ever happen, but it has happened and it can happen. And that's why the website findingyourwayontario.ca, this is the live link down here at the bottom. That's why this website was developed between the police, the Alzheimer's Society. And I would encourage you, if you are a care partner for somebody living with a cognitive change, that you check this website out. If you need help or more information, please be in touch with the Society. But this is a place to start looking at how you can reduce the risk of somebody going missing, what to do if somebody does go missing, how to reunite after a missing incident. And it has more education opportunities. 4 free 15-minute education modules are available on that website. So please think about checking it out. We also have, because I've been promoting support groups, an educational opportunity with support built right in. It's the Enhancing Care program. Some of you have heard me speak of it before, so I won't go on at length, but I will send that information along with the other materials when I send the evaluation out after today's session. And of course, you've heard me say that, yes, our services are offered no charge, and we are so happy to be able to give those to you. And how do we do that? Well, we raise money. And we're right now in the month of May, we are deep into our Walk for Alzheimer's. And so this is a wonderful opportunity. You yourself can join the Walk for Alzheimer's. It's easy to register. There's a live link here. And yes, you'll be getting this with your evaluation as well. It's easy to sponsor somebody if you would like to sponsor. I know that many of our staff are involved in the walk and walking, or maybe one of your neighbors or friends or relatives are involved in the walk and you would like to sponsor them. If you would like to sponsor and you don't know who's in the walk, it's available on the walk webpage. You can just type in somebody's name and it'll pop up and you can make a donation. Or you can call our office. We'll always help you make a donation. And we appreciate it because that's what keeps our services at no charge. You can contact us. This is all up to date, folks. These are the current phone numbers and the current addresses. The offices are available. I still suggest that if you're going to go to Cambridge, you definitely need to phone first for an appointment. And it's often a good idea at Guelph, although we are trying to man the office at all times now in the Guelph location. Okay, so I'm going to open it up for some questions.